All right, 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock. Sweet. All right, how's everyone doing this morning? Good. All right, just close that. All right, so today we are going to be starting React. So I know, I'm going to assume everyone's fairly excited about starting React. Let's get this one. So I got the lecture. There we go. There's the lecture, just like that, the lecture notes. And excited about React for good reason, right? All the hype. Everybody wants to learn React in one way, shape, or form. So learning React can be key to you landing a position. Learning Angular could be key. Learning Rails could be key. I mean, any one of the technologies that we've taught so far could be instrumental. A combination of the technologies could also be instrumental. So you're going to learn React, and then we'll learn how to use React with Rails. And I mean, React could also be used with Node instead of Express serving, EJS templates. Node could have also served React templates, or just bundle React and send it to the client, just like Angular, right? We put all of our stuff into the public folder, sent that to the client. So there could be some of that as well. So when it comes to learning React, you'll see some similarities to the other technologies, Angular kind of specifically. All right, cool. So let's jump into what are our objectives. We're going to describe why React is so popular and in high demand. It's got to be a reason for why everybody wants to learn it, versus it just being like, oh my God, the most amazing technology. There has to be other reasons for it as well. We'll talk about the history of React, where it started, what company created it and how it evolved from there. Describe what React is in terms of code organization, which is something that I think you might have seen most strongly in Rails, and how Rails is very opinionated and how the code is highly organized, and you have to write it in the Rails way, which does make it easier for someone who is supporting a Rails app to go and kind of take your seat when you leave, or look at a Rails app you built and kind of intuitively understand where things would be. And so React also has a great way of organizing code into something called components. We'll get into that. We'll explain what JSX is. Up to this point, something similar to JSX would have been EJS, combining HTML and JavaScript in the same file. That's really the concept of JSX, combining HTML and CSS in the same file. You can loop inside of JSX. You can enumerate variables inside of JSX, all the things that you could do in EJS, JSX can do as well. We'll explain what state is. There's going to be two things with React that you are going to hear over and over and over again, and one of those is props, and the other is state. Those two things, along with React as a whole, and along with components, really sums up React. If you're going to use React, you have to know components, you have to know props, and you have to know state. These three things are essential to learning the fundamentals of React. React itself has a huge ecosystem. And it's growing and continues to grow. There's new React tools that come out all the time. I want to learn the latest in React itself, whatever the library offers, and then the additional tools come out. And I'll show some of those additional tools as well. You'll get an idea of like where the environment is going. So what is React? Well, React is what we're going to be using right now, obviously, to start building out our front end. And we've been using server-side rendering with templates, right? EJS being the predominant template to render our views. We're still in this MVC model. So the MVC model in React, the MVC model, as it pertains to where React fits in, React is the view. And so we're still trying to, you know, solve a problem or implement a tool for a specific niche of the MVC, the view being React here, okay? Now, there's many upsides to server-side rendering, okay? But there's also some downsides, right? I mean, EJS worked, that was great, and then we went to, you know, Angular, and Angular worked pretty good, but a lot of tools out there are still kind of server-side rendering only. So what are some of the flaws with server-side rendering? Well, it can be cumbersome to maintain, right? There's a lot that you have to be aware of when it comes to server-side rendering. And when you want to change one thing, you have to change things across many files. Certain things helped us out with that, maybe partials, right? So if we wanted to have a header or a footer that was consistent across all files, we could create headers and footers to do that and then import them as partials. But all these files meant that you had to be aware of a lot of things. Your data was tightly coupled with your view. Okay, so we embedded our data inside of HTML using EJS. Now, we're going to be doing that in a similar fashion with React, and the fact that React is going to render our view, and in order to render the view, it needs HTML, right? Some CSS for styling, and the data. I want to render out a to-do list. I need the to-do items in order to render that out. Every update requires a page reload. I think that is really, you know, one of the reasons, you know, React kind of took off as it pertains to this single page app, SS, right? Single page app, SSA, right? Single page app. SPA, single page app, in that we don't want the user to reload their page. We want the data to refresh, but we don't want a full kind of like refresh of the page. And, you know, for two reasons. The first being that there's no reason to resend data that the client already has. If they have the header and the nav and the footer and then a side, and they already have that, why should we re-deliver that? That really doesn't make any sense. And that's what server-side templates were doing, right? You would build up a template, grab the partials, put the partials into where they needed to go, and then we kind of send that on our way. And we don't want to do that anymore. Okay, so React is going to allow us to create this single page app where we just request data. And you did it with Angular too, right? Angular requested data and got data and kind of emulated this single page app design. So you already understand that. So React here is just the view layer portion though. Like I would say maybe Angular tries to encompass the whole MVC model, but React is just the view portion. That's all it's trying to do. When we create out our React application, we can emulate MVC. We can emulate what it would be like to have something that grabs data or makes a request to data. We can incorporate routing into React, just like Angular had it. We can incorporate methods, functions that run our logic as a controller might do. So we can emulate that. But in the broader scope of things, in the MVC scope, it really is just the view layer, okay? So when we're taking a look at React, oh, by the way, the previous instructor, Carolyn, had written this article on React. We're not going to go into it, but if you want to take a read, she wrote it for GA, and just as a really high-level overview of what it's like to introduce React to somebody that has no idea of React. So you can go take a look at it on your spare time if you want to read it. As well as the React docs is something that is also pretty on point. I think as part of some of your projects, you know, Project 2 and Project 3, both that required APIs, you might have come across, hey, here's a great API, I want to use it, and then realize, man, the documentation really not so good for this thing. And so it made it hard for you to work with that API. But with React, React has some awesome documentation, like really, really awesome documentation. And we can learn a lot from React just going through their documentation, okay? And they notify us of the actual updates that they're on right now, 16.8.6. And actually with the introduction of 16, they've released a lot of new things with React that even I'm still trying to catch up with. It's kind of like ES6, then there's ES7, then there's ES8, and there's all this new stuff that comes out that I hear about, I see, but I haven't yet had the opportunity to actually incorporate or use cases. Like I'm not sure when I use all of these things. When's the appropriate time? So as we discuss React, I'm just going to go back here because we are going to start talking about some of these points here, and I'm just going to go back to the React side because this is really where the information is coming from. React is these things, and this is, I would suppose, the greatest selling points of React here as they kind of like, as a high-level overview. React is declarative, okay? One thing that React does is it creates interactive UIs. And so its job, really, every component, and we'll get to components here, every component is meant to render a UI. And UI is any HTML that's available. Like that's what you see on the page. React should be rendering that. So components render UI. But declarative means, you know, simple views for each state of your application, okay? React is, with the efficiency that React has, it's going to update and render those components as the data changes. And I want to kind of emphasize here that data changes right here is really going to be synonymous with state. State is the data that your application is aware of, okay? So when we do get to state, just keep that in mind. Data deals with state here, and changes to state means changes to your actual data, okay? And so writing it declaratively just kind of makes your code more predictable and easy to debug. I know if I asked anyone to, like, I don't know, reverse a string or do some sort of looping construct, we'd all may default to using a for loop. And a for loop is more imperative. You have to write every step of a for loop. You know, for I is equal to this, and I is less than that, I plus plus, or I minus minus, right? It takes a little bit more thought. It is a bit more flexible. But when we really kind of want to write out our code, and we want to write it out the most efficiently, we might, and some of you have done this already, convert a string into an array. And you converted it into an array so that you could leverage array methods. And array methods allow you to do things like map, for each, filter, right? These three key methods that I've been stressing, these methods allow you to do declarative programming, okay? When you use those, you're kind of elevating the code to a point where you don't worry about the actual for loop. The map is doing a for loop under the hood for you. All you're concerned with is handling the elements that's passed and perhaps its index, and that's all you care about. You don't care about going down or up in the loop, because the for loop, for each loop is only going to go in one direction anyway, right? So you're concerned with dealing with the element, not constructing the looping construct. It's already done. So a for each in a map is more declarative. And so declarative being, I'm just trying to like present it as this, you know, extrapolation of some of the code that's required to run. You can call it at a much higher level and not worry about what's happening under the hood. And then we have component-based. It is component-based. Everything that we're going to create is going to be a component, right? So we're going to encapsulate these components, and the components are going to be used to, you know, manage state at times. There are two different kinds of components, a functional component and a class-based component. And so the class-based can manage state, right? And I said that state was data, and changes to data change the state of your application. And changing a state is a trigger point for a React component. Just like, you know, in Angular had, you know, two-way binding. If I made a change here in the app.js, it was reflected on the screen, right? And if I made a change on the screen and some sort of input, it was reflected immediately inside of Angular, that kind of two-way state. So even Angular had an idea of state, right? And state was changing what is the data at this point in time. Since component logic is written in JavaScript instead of templates, once again, we're using components now. You can pass data through your app and keep state out of the DOM. So we can use things like props. Did say that was the other key word here, like props and state. And so we need a way, right, just like Angular, to pass data around, and we will. We will have a way of passing data through our component hierarchy. And that's important to know, because there's going to be a hierarchy here. Just like HTML has a hierarchy, right? If I can create a container, that container is going to have maybe a section. Inside of that section, there's going to be maybe an H1, maybe a paragraph, right? Maybe a div that contains other things. Components are also hierarchical like that. And since they render UI, you'll see that we can construct what you see on the page and break that into further components. Last one is, you know, learn once, write it anywhere, okay? So when you learn React, you don't necessarily need to like rewrite a lot of your existing code. I mean, if you had some JavaScript, you can incorporate that JavaScript. If you had an HTML structure, it's really just at times a copy and paste to get some bare minimum HTML structure on your page. And you could create your first React component from just doing that. And usually when I would teach maybe like the 2-hour React intro, you know, for dummies, anybody who just wants to learn it at a base level, they know JavaScript, they know stuff, but they just kind of want to get the high level overview. I would do that. Take a small app, take all the HTML, stick it in a React component, comment out the HTML, and we'd have our first React component, and they'd see how easy it is to actually do that, okay? React can also render on the server using Node and some other tools, as well as this, React Native. React Native is the ability to write React specifically for mobile. So if there's anyone who is looking at, like, I really want to go into building mobile apps, which is something you should really consider. You know, if more than 51% of the people on the web are accessing sites on their mobile devices, then writing for mobile should also be a consideration for you as to what technologies you study. Once you leave the course, what technologies are you going to study? React Native is one of those. And some of you might even, happens a lot, happens in almost every cohort I've taught, decide to learn React Native for the final project. It's not so hard. Once you know React Native isn't really all that hard to pick up, okay? And there's other tools out there when it comes to server-side rendering, and I was just gonna show an article that shows some of the other React tools that are being used. We're going to be using this tool called Create React App. Not today, but we will. There's another tool called Next.js, which is server-side rendering of React. And then another tool called Gatsby, which is like static site template generators in React. There's a lot of stuff. I've been reading up on Gatsby, and I follow a guy who does D3 in React quite heavily, and he's been incorporating Gatsby into it. So I've seen how Gatsby works, and this would be, if I had to choose one of these, I already know Create React App because we teach it. Gatsby is something we don't teach and just came out maybe like last year sometime. So this is something I want to kind of start learning myself. So those are some of the advantages of React, and you know, kind of why we're going to be using it. Declarative, component-based, right? Learn once, write it anywhere. Makes it really easy to jump into a React project because I know the structure, the structural components, right? Or how you write the app. And I can see some patterns there that I can just leverage. And I can see the hierarchy kind of in front of me when you're looking at it. So what about the history of React? React was created by Facebook in 2011, I believe, it was created, and was used just kind of for like one small project. And there's a lot of smart, really, really smart developers working at Facebook and Google. I mean, I think a lot of the graduates or anyone who goes to, you know, a software engineering program, a web development program, would love to work at companies like Facebook and Google, maybe Pinterest, maybe Instagram, Amazon, all of these top tier companies, and they leverage a lot of technologies, which requires a lot of specific skill sets in order to implement them, right? So we'd all love to work at Facebook. I'd love to work at Facebook. And so when they did incorporate it, they expanded it. They saw the benefits of React. So whoever internally created it was like, hey, this is great. We should start using it elsewhere. So, hey, let's use it in some more projects. And then it was being used on Instagram. Facebook purchased Instagram. And then all of a sudden, Instagram is incorporating it. And Instagram is a huge tool that a lot of people on the web use. I'm even creating a workshop on how to learn HTML and CSS, building out Instagram posts, because I think Instagram is so hot that there's a little market out there to introduce people to the fundamentals of just HTML and CSS using Instagram quotes as the template in order to have some fun. And so the fact that React demonstrated, you know, that it was a solution and it appealed to many developers. At the beginning, though, when it did come out, it was kind of like, combining, you know, JavaScript and HTML, that's, you know, we should really be separating those concerns. Even though on the server side, we weren't, right? We were using EJS and sending data, enumerating variables, looping through, creating things. We're already doing that server side, but not client side. And so the first reaction was like, oh, what was going on? I did find this little kind of timeline of React and kind of where it started. And so when React actually started, or they called it, introduced XHP into their PHP stack. Okay, and I guess that was the beginning of React. And then React really was called Fax.js. once again, at the very, very beginning. And then it wasn't until 2012 that React emerged, until May, where Instagram started to use it. Okay, and then I think Mark Zuckerberg introduced it at TechCrunch, and then it became available to the general public. So in 2013, it became open source and opened it to the world. And everyone started to kind of investigate it. Once again, if a large company like Facebook's like, hey, we should be using, we're using this tool and it's awesome and we're doing it and we're using it on Instagram, another huge site that everyone uses, it kind of catches everyone's attention. And so from that point, React just kind of took off. So React is really, really popular. So what in React, what do we need to know in terms of code, right? So React, awesome for us, it's written in JavaScript. So at this point in time, you've had more hours invested into JavaScript than you have Ruby. And so the strongest skill that you have would be JavaScript, right? And it's going to continue to be a skill that you develop, even if you kind of land a job where you're doing Rails, you still need to know JavaScript. If you happen to land a job where you're doing React, you're going to be doing JavaScript every day. Similar with Angular, right? You're going to be doing JavaScript every day. So it's written in JavaScript. It works for us. I mean, I love JavaScript. That's my predominant language. It's always, however, React has always been kind of bleeding edge. The next, like, hey, ES6 came out, ES7, let's use these latest things because they're coming out in order to be used for specific purposes, right? They're not just creating the next version of JavaScript just to be like, hey, it'd be really cool to have this thing, let's do it, right? Comes out of necessity. And so they saw the necessity to use the latest version of JavaScript. At the time, ES6 is what they were using. So they were using JSX, which is this hybrid of HTML and HTML. And in order for us to understand that, it needed to be compiled into older JavaScript. So there's this tool called Babel. And Babel, let's get rid of this. Babel is a tool that allows you to write ES6 code. So what you're seeing on the left-hand side is ES6 code, and it converts it into its ES5 version, kind of downgrades it. And so we need a tool like this because our browsers, the client browsers where React is going to be rendered, don't understand ES6, or they'll have issues trying to run some of that ES6 code. So we need a way to transpile it into an older version. And transpiling is just the concept of taking this newer version of JavaScript and converting it into its older version of JavaScript. And you can always go try it out. You can say, hey, I want to try it out. It's just a really cool tool. I mean, Babel, the library, is something that we're going to be using, and it's going to do it for us under the hood, but we do have to say we want to use Babel. And so here they just give you some examples like, oh, here's an array, I'm mapping, I'm using fat arrows, which is something we use, but older JavaScript didn't use fat arrows, they used the function keyword, right? That's what they used. You needed the curly braces, and here you needed the return keyword. If we wanted to concatenate arrays, which is something that those that were trying to figure out flatten an array realize they have to concatenate arrays. Well, there's other ways to concatenate arrays, new ways to concatenate arrays. Okay, we could use this thing called the spread operator. The spread operator, once we convert it, is just this. It's really just doing that. Take an empty array, concatenate the original array with another array, and then return it for this array. Here we could use the spread operator, which spreads open the array. So it takes all the elements, pulls them out. Okay, so there's something happening under the hood, right? And this, to me, is also maybe a representation of maybe, declarative programming. Like, I'm just doing this poof, and I just call that one thing, and it does a bunch of things for me, instead of maybe doing a for loop that pushes things into a new array. Okay. So let's get started working with React. Go into the week 11, day 1 folder, student examples, and we're going to create a few files. I am in the instructor examples right here. I'm just going to move that over there. Do this because I am going to be opening up Atom. And so I'm here. I'm going to, hey, do an ls, make sure, hey, there's nothing there. So mkdir intro to React. All right. So I have my folder structure there. I'm going to change into intro to React. ls, nothing there. Whoop. And let's touch index.html and an app.js file, both of those. Okay? And, oh, here we go. And put this over here. Wait, I misspelled it. Okay. We have app, index, Atom, and Atom opened up over here. So let me drag it over here. Here we go. Okay. HTML file, and just make sure everyone set up with files. All right, so just give me a thumbs up when you're all set up. Created your folder, created your files. Oh, let me stop sharing that. Reshare the other screen. I think when I swapped it over, there we go. All right, cool. So let's get started here. So we're going to add some HTML here in order to get our app started. You know, we do have, I suppose, Emmet, or we could just do HTML tab. Oh, no, I guess we don't have it. I think I turned off Emmet. Did I? No. I just did the exclamation point tab, created it. I have my structure here for it. And so just our base structure, okay? Maybe, you know, in the title here, we change it to hello world. So maybe I'll do that, hello world. And then in our body, we'll have a div with a container. Okay. And this is where we're going to get our little message to show up. Okay? And the last thing we need to do is to add a script tag where we're going to import our app.js file, right? Here we're also saying, hey, what's our char set UTF 8, okay? Enabled autosave, so I don't have to save things anymore. Should just save it for me. I'll get through any issues with that, okay? Oh, expand the desktop. Okay, sorry about that. And let's make sure you're all set up with your HTML. Set up. And we'll start adding. Good. Once we have that, there's really no content in there as of yet. I just started it up to make sure, you know, we're going to get any HTML errors or anything. Just going to get rid of free React app, these articles. If you're interested in those articles too, I can always shoot them your way later on. I didn't want to shoot them out now because then everyone might start reading those articles. Cool. So I'm going to go to app.js. Okay. Now, we want to output a message here. So I'm going to say const message, it's just going to be equal to hello world. We're going to take it from the very beginning of JavaScript, and then we'll do our conversion into React. So I'm going to, yep, sure thing. Okay, so I'm going to use JavaScript to add an event listener. Okay, it's going to be a DOM content loaded event listener, and what we're going to be doing with that is telling JavaScript to wait until all the DOM content, all of our HTML, is loaded before we do anything else. Okay. You saw the same thing with jQuery. Does anybody remember what the jQuery equivalent to that was? What do you remember off the top of their heads? I'm just going to put it out there. We won't go into it. I was just curious if anyone off the top of their head. Documents, dots. Ready? Does that ring a bell? Sure, that rings a bell. Right?
It's like the anonymous function, right?
Yeah. You could use an anonymous function, but there was also something like this. Documents. You might have seen this, .ready. This is also, and then it would contain the anonymous function. You do a bunch of stuff, or you did the anonymous function, but that is also a way that you will see comparable to that, okay? So here, this is the JavaScript way of doing it, straight up JavaScript. What you're going to see is, in the world of React, you are not going to see jQuery present. And there's a reason for that. React wants to control the DOM. It wants to manipulate the DOM because it has another important feature called the virtual DOM. And we'll get into that later, but jQuery interferes with React's ability to control and manage the DOM. jQuery would circumvent that. So we're going to use JavaScript right here. I'm going to say const div is equal to document.query selector, right? I'm going to grab the container, okay? And then I'm going to give the container itself, right, which is stored in div, an inner HTML, and we will give it an h1. We'll do some concatenation here, a message plus h1, okay? So if we do this, and I refresh the page, we should see our content there, right? So make sure you get all that. Make sure you test it, and then refresh the page. Okay, let me know when you got that and everything works. You should see hello world. No error messages in your developer tools. I'd also like you to open up developer tools as well. Keep developer tools open. It's one thing when we're developing and we're kind of going constantly back to the HTML to confirm that it's working, is to have developer tools open so that if there's an error, we can see it immediately. Some people just tend to like, oh, it's not working, go back to their Java, go back to their app and start looking through this code without really investigating what's happening in the console. What is it telling you? Because what it's telling you might be indicative of what's happening, clearly the message, right? And then you can investigate. Usually when I teach, when I'm teaching on site anywhere, whether it's, the SEI program or part-time JavaScript or Feud, I always say that if you call me over to figure out a problem that you're having, if I don't see developer tools open, I'm just going to kind of walk away. because developer tools might have solved, 60% of the problems, and you would have been able to intuitively figure them out instead of calling me over. It's just that natural trying to kind of put a blocker in the way of you just falling into like, oh, I need help. I want to, just figure it out for me. Okay. Cool. Looks like we're getting it. Once again, this could be, if you are seeing errors, could be just a small typo. So we're just really pay close attention when you're typing. Now this is, once again, similar to jQuery in the fact that you can grab DOM elements and add DOM elements. JavaScript is what jQuery was really running under the hood anyway. And so we can manipulate JavaScript or the DOM using just plain old JavaScript. And I also want you to keep that in consideration when you make the decision to either learn straight up React or learning to manipulate the DOM using JavaScript, because I know certain jobs out there aren't using React, and some of them are using JavaScript solely for DOM manipulation. Okay, so you may go on an interview where they're like, hey, I need you to grab this thing and do this thing just using JavaScript, do not use React. And so you might be like, I haven't really done that in a while. So, take a look at those job requirements and try to get a heads up. Are they just using, JavaScript? And then, brush up on that JavaScript before you go. Okay. So in order for us to work with React, let me go back to our HTML. In order for us to work with React, we need to import certain libraries, okay? And these libraries are going to be React, the main library. And this particular library is really going to be used for creating the components. So this would be a component-based library. It's what we're going to be using to create our UI, per se. And then React DOM. React DOM is used to manage the DOM, okay? And one of the advantages of React is the virtual DOM. There is this concept where React creates this virtual representation of the DOM, and it manipulates only the things that you need to manipulate within the DOM. And it does it with such performance, which is part of the reason why React kind of took off, because it was more performant because of this virtual DOM, okay? The other library that we need is Babel, because once again, we are transpiling ES6 code into ES5 code, so Babel is needed. We can't do that without Babel. We will get errors if we don't have Babel, and that's why having the terminal window open right here is going to be important, because later on we're going to see a bunch of errors. And then Babel needs to know what files it should be converting. It's just not going to take every JavaScript file that it sees and be like, oh, I'm going to convert this, because that may be just too much overhead. There may be JavaScript files that don't need to be converted because they aren't React. They're just, Google Analytics or something like that that doesn't need to be converted into anything else, okay? So there's 3 script files. I'm going to copy them. I'm also going to paste them, only because it would take us, there's going to be a lot of fat fingering for these particular files. So let me knock those out. Get those files in there. Just move this out a little bit. It's over. And now that we have our files, we're like, hey, that's great. Which, once again, this shouldn't change the way our app is behaving. So if I go here and I refresh the app, nothing's really going to change. There's no error messages. We just imported libraries. We didn't do anything, right? We're just like, I'd like to use these things, but I haven't really said or done where I want to use them. But now we're going to tell React where we want to use these files or which files to target, okay? So I'm just going to put put a little note here, right? So React is focused, so I'm going to just say react.js here, right? Is for building out components. In a nutshell, that's what it's for, building out the components, okay? And React DOM is for managing the DOM, okay? And I'm going to put here the virtual DOM, okay? And then Babel, once again, is going to be used, Babel is used to transpile ES6 into ES5. And I'm going to say ES6, ES7, ES8. I think we're up to ES8 now, and there's all these new versions of React. Okay. Later on, there's ways to even tell Babel which versions of ES to look out for. Like I want bleeding edge JavaScript versus, you know, something safer like ES6, something that's been tested, and, you know. So down here we have to tell Babel to target the app.js file. Okay, and we're going to do this by adding a new property. I'm going to put it right in front of source. Type is equal to text Babel. Okay, using text Babel. Type is equal to text Babel. Okay, so that's going to target it and say, hey, you want this particular file to be monitored? Okay, so just make sure. I mean, I have the char sit here, no biggie. This shouldn't error out, shouldn't break anything.
I get a CORS error when I add that line.
Yeah, you are going to get a CORS error.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, yeah. Down here, we're going to see that error, right? See this error down here? We're getting that error, and the reason why we're getting this, and some of you might have experienced, I know for a fact some of you experienced this, I think in project 2. How many had to, here, let me just do a poll. Poll. How many needed to run a local server? I'm just going to say Python for unit 2 project. Yes. Here we go. I'm just taking a little poll here. I know that some of you had to run a local server. I just put Python in here because Python was, yeah, so it was only, we got more no's. I know a handful. What about any of the other projects? Any other projects? Okay, yeah, so we got a few. Okay. And the reason is there was some code in there that you were trying to run, and it just wouldn't run because CORS is this cross-origin request thing, all right? So I know there were some of you, and some of you resolved that by running a Python server or a web server. Your local web server in this instance is Python because Python comes with Mac. It's just something that it comes with. There's other servers that we can run, okay? And so we're getting this error message here. Now, before we resolve the error message, I just want to go here and in our app.js, we are going to add our first component. Once again, I'm just going to really kind of follow the lecture on point as it is, and we'll deal with this message in just a minute. Okay, in order for us to render React, okay, we need to call the React DOM global method right now, right? It's a global object. Call its render method. Now, when we render something, we first have to tell it, I'm going to do it, see if I can do it on one line here because I really want to write some comments above it. I'm going to say we're going to render in each one whatever the message is. In this instance, we need to put in curly braces. It's not in the lecture. It just says message, but we need curly braces. And I'm going to explain why. I'm going to say message h1, comma, and then document dot query selector dot contain. Okay. So here, when we use React DOM, let me just put some notes here. Okay, so React DOM is to render, or is to manage DOM, right? We know that. And it's meant to manage the DOM, adding, updating, doing all of that. But when we do the render inside of render method, it's really this. What do you want to render? Where to render? These are the two things that React DOM render is answering for us. It's answering what do you want to render, and here we're saying render this HTML that has this message, which will be enumerated because it is a variable, so we need to elicit the variable values from that, and where to render it. And this is really similar in the world of Angular to where you did ng app, right? In Angular, you would be like, ng app is this, and like Angular's like, cool, this whole DOM, wherever you put me, everything that it is the parent, every child, we can manage it. And then you would do an ng controller, right? And then the ng controller said, oh, cool, this little section of this app, I can manage, and like this ng controller, I can manage just this. You could have nested ng controllers that they could look up in scope. So in React, we're doing something very similar. We still need to say what we want to render and where we want this thing to be rendered. I almost consider like this thing as maybe the mount point. Where do you want React to mount itself so it can control things? That's usually what I would consider this, the mount point. But once again, it's just where you want it to render, right? Now, once again, if I go back here and I refresh, still seeing this error message, everything, that error message we know is there before we even added this code. So this was an issue with Babel coming into play, because I think if we, commented out Babel, I think if I commented out this, I saved it and I ran it, we wouldn't have an error message. Okay, so Babel is really the issue for that. Okay, so I'm going to undo that. Go back here, save, refresh, and now it's back in. So Babel is the one that's kind of like causing that problem. You can clearly see Babel min cross-origin request. It's trying to like connect the Babel and like do stuff online. That's what it's doing. Like, where is it getting its stuff to do all the conversion? Okay. So what we're going to do here is we are going to fix that by running a local server. Now, before we hit the local server portion, the fact that we're in developer tools, React comes with, or they've made available for React, some React developer tools. Really cool tools that we can use to kind of examine the React world of elements, okay? And we can see where props and state will be in it. And so we can examine the underworkings of a React app. And so there's this tool called React Dev Tools that would allow us to do that. So this React Developer Tools, let me select that out because I'd like everyone just to install that. Install the React Developer Tools if you do not already have it. It's a really quick plugin. I don't know if it's going to make or ask that you restart, Chrome. I don't think it is. Should just add it immediately. And if it does, if you refresh, you will see now this little React tab here, okay? So in Developer Tools now, you would see a little React tab, and if you click on it, it's like, hey, I'm trying to connect to React. Now remember, we still have errors. So until we resolve this, we might just continue to see the error message. But we will have access to it, and this will come pertinent later on, okay? What we do see, though, is, this yellow message. You're like, hey, you're using the in-browser Babel transformer. Be sure to pre-compile your script for production. And what that means is we are working in a development environment. And being that it's a development environment, we could use development tools. Things like NodeMon was a development tool. That's not used in production on production servers. Morgan was kind of a development tool, which was a logger. And so Babel, the way it's configured now, is a development tool, and we need to pre-compile it or transpile it into normal JavaScript to render it out later on, okay? Because we still have to send it to the client, and if we send it to the client, we're not going to be using this format to do it. We are actually going to be sending out the transpiled file. So when we get to create React app, we're going to run a command called build. The minute we type that command, React looks at all of our files, transpiles them, and puts them into one file, one index HTML file that we can then shoot out to the client, okay? So we now need to kind of get over this error with these issues. And for that, we're going to run a server. Now, depending on what version you have of Python, there's a couple of different servers to run here. If you have 2x, you can run this simple server. If you have Python 3x, you can run http.server. There's also another one that I'm particularly going to use because I have it installed. I like using it. To me, it's less typing. This requires me typing Python-m simple HTML. This one says Python-m HTTP server. I want to do something just a little bit more basic. So there's an NPM package called HTTP server. Okay, I'll select that out. I don't know if you have it. If you don't have it, you can install it as a package. You can install it, globally here. That's what the G is for, to install it globally. Because we want it to be installed globally, because we want to run it anywhere we want. And once it's running, like once the server is installed, we go into our terminal. Right? I'm in the terminal. I'm in the folder where React is. If I run HTTP server, right? If I do -o, it's going to open up the browser. I don't need it to open. Actually, you know what? Let's do that. Let's do -o to open it up. It'll open it up. And message is not defined. Let me see what I'm getting here. Message. Do we need these? Let me see. Maybe I didn't need these. Nope. All right. What's that?
Oh, message spelling is incorrect.
Yeah. Oh, that was it. That was it? Okay. You just see, it is outputting it. We will see later on that we need the curly braces. Let me just see if it still works with it. Curly braces are going to be needed later on to enumerate certain variables. You will see it. Yeah, here we go. Hello world. So in the lecture, curly braces weren't there, but here we need the curly braces to enumerate this, and this is part of JSX. So I'm just going to put here curly brace message. Curlies are needed to enumerate variables in JSX. Okay, just like in EJS, you needed the those symbols, percent signs, and equal to enumerate something in EJS. Here we need this. What was it? Does anybody remember what it was in React to enumerate variables? Was it like 2 curly braces, right? I think. If it works, you'll see this. Okay. Test that works. Okay. So I just want you to confirm. We'll talk about that other message. If you see this, I'm just going to show you because some of you might have seen this also. depending on the folder that you're in. I'm going to run the server now. Watch. Did anyone see this? You can just jump in and be like, yeah, I saw that. That's awesome. If no one saw that, when you start one of these local web servers, if the web server cannot find an index HTML file, it loads up the folder structure. So it almost gives you like this FTP type folder structure. If I go into something here that does have an HTML file, so if I click into Intro to React, it will then load that index file up, okay? So depending on where your server is, it's going to stop it. I'm going to go into the file now, change directory, Intro to React. I'll run it from here. Don't need the O anymore because I'm already in here. Oh, just going to get rid of that and just do 88. Boom. Oh. All right. What you might have to do sometimes, you're going to have to do it quite often for the morning lecture in the afternoon, is we have to do kind of a hard refresh on the browser. Now, you just have to hold the shift key down and then refresh. And that's a hard refresh where it loads all the files again. Sometimes it's not going to see or kind of retranspile the file, so we have to tell it to do just that, okay?
Hey, Joe, I'm getting a permission error when I try and install.
Oh, if you're getting the permission in error, you can run the sudo.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah,
Thanks.
so just proceed it with sudo. It'll ask you for your admin password. Okay.
Hey, Joe, what was the solution to not having the fave icon error?
Oh, the fave icon? Well, the only solution to you not getting this, and this is not something you have to worry about, fave icons are like these little icons up here in the browser. For us, we don't have a fave icon. You would have to load a fave icon or reference it as in the head here. We'd have to kind of load an image. So if you were like, if we just did a search like missing fave, and you're going to get this a lot, so don't even stress it. Hey, do I have a fave icon? And in here, they'll tell you how you would kind of load it up. You'd have to like redirect to a fave icon. Or I'm looking for something where they just do it inside of the head. I was just looking for, I had to make sure you have a fave icon. Maybe this was it. Just looking for an example of where they loaded it up right here. See this? That, we would need the icon though for that. Okay, and what the browser is going to look for is this. Do I see a link tag, and do I see a link that has an icon with the name of fave icon? If I see something, I'll load that. If I don't, you're going to get this error message that's right here. Where is it? There it is. That we don't have the fave icon. So that's like something not to even worry about. You're going to see that constantly.
Okay, then what was the next step to make sure that the hello world shows up?
Oh, you would hold the shift key down and then refresh the page, do a hard refresh.
Yeah, that didn't work.
Okay.
Did you do something in the
app.js? Yeah, so in the app.js right here, see the curly braces around the message? I had misspelled my message. So it was just coming out as message, but the curly braces are needed around the H1. All right.
I'm not sure what I missed. My hello world's not displaying either.
Okay. Do you want to share your screen? Just maybe if we bang out one particular error message we can see. Okay. So you have message at the top, right? React message. Now, are you holding the shift key down and refreshing the page? Because it looks like it's stuck. It almost looks like your page is just in this perpetual kind of refresh mode. I don't know. Did you put a debugger in here at some point in time?
Not intentionally.
Okay. Because look how it's like it wants to try to debug. That's where I'm getting. So save your file, save your app.js file. Just make sure your app.js file is saved, which looks like it is. Now go back here, hold the shift key, stop it from refreshing, just X out of that. Let me see, is it gonna, all right. Get out of developer tools because that'll end the debugger. We could just click the plus sign. Now go back into developer tools, open up developer tools again. Syntax error app. So it looks like it's trying to load app.js. That's what it looks like from the error message, that you're trying to load app.js.
Does not be in here.
No, that's supposed to be in there. Yeah, that should be in there.
I think you need a comma after your closing H1 tag in app.js.
You go back into your app. Oh yeah, you don't have the comma.
Dude, commas were my downfall yesterday.
go.
2 days in a row.
All right. You good? Anyone else? Anyone else having? All right. Okay. Get into it. Awesome. All right. So we got our hello world working. Pretty easy, right? At this point in time, React doesn't seem too confusing. I'm going to just put these on separate lines also. I only put them on one line earlier so that I could, write this out and provide some context into what these two are doing, right? This is the what you want to render, right? And this is the where you want to render. So maybe I'll just put it here. What to render and where to render. Now, I just also want to point out that this React DOM is something that you are going to write once for your whole app. One time you write this thing in the app.js file, you never write it again. So it's not something you're like, man, I got to master and memorize. It's really basic. It's going to be really intuitive, but you are only going to run it one time. You're going to be working on components for 98% of the time. There'll be other things that you'll need to do, but this runs once in the main file only. It's kind of like in Angular when you created that controller or you created the app, right? You did it once and then you created controllers. Same similar process that we're going to be doing. Okay. See what we got. We're almost at the end, so let's just finish and then we can take a break. Okay. What we're going to do, we finished. This is it. So we're able to do this now, commenting out the DOM so that we don't see it, right? We're just comparing what's happening here using vanilla JavaScript. All we're doing is, using documents, JavaScript document to grab the DOM, add an event listener, and the event listener's DOM content loaded. When all of the DOM elements are loaded, then please do this. Because if the DOM elements aren't loaded, then there is no container element to grab. So you'd run into issues if you didn't have that. Then we just use query selector to grab it, and then inner HTML to give it some text, right? And so here message is this message. There's no need for curly braces because it's plain old JavaScript. But when we get to React DOM, we're still going to render something without this incessant need to do like grab the thing, document loaded, grab the container, and then do it. We still need to kind of target the container, but it knows that it's going to render this content, okay? So that's our first React setup, really. That's all we did. We haven't built our components out yet. Things are going to get fun and interesting once we start building out components. But we needed to kind of walk through this to see what's needed to get React running, what's happening here, and then everything else for the rest of the day are going to be creating components above it. Okay?
Joe.
Yeah.
Joe, why is it not, what is happening that we aren't getting the hello world message twice? Like, why is the vanilla JavaScript not working anymore?
Oh, let me take a look.
And instead we're rendering it through the React DOM.
Oh, because think of it like this. Which container are you grabbing to render the H1? which container are you giving the message to? This container, right? And I mean, I suppose the element. So think of the process. When this app loads, this gets loaded first, right? The below is loaded first. So you see, right? So you see the message, right? Makes sense. Then React DOM gets loaded, and what do you see? The same message, right? Both of these are targeting the same H1 that's inside of the container. So we're not targeting two separate elements, we're targeting the actual same element. Perhaps if I change this to be like, what do you want to render? Maybe if I change this to be an H2, let me just see if this will, no, doesn't change it. Just want to see, is there any errors? It says 844, just can't find the, yeah, it's not doing it. But in the end, that's what it's doing. It's targeting this, it's loading the message as it would normally, then it gets to this, and it's like, oh, you want me to grab the same container and add the same content? Awesome. I'll do the same thing. There's no difference there, okay? I think if we wanted this to work, maybe if we went in here and we created a separate container, just to kind of demo, you know, if this was maybe container 1, I'm just going to kind of change it. If I go to container 1, maybe this message would be container 1, just to kind of see, right? Would we have two separate ones? We're still not having two separate ones. I'm finding it odd that it's not even loading the JavaScript. We're not getting any error messages, but it's not targeting this container anymore to load this. For some reason, maybe React is overtaking it. I just find it odd that it's not doing it. It should. As far as I'm concerned, it should do it. In the end, you won't be doing this, though, Lauren. You won't be having regular JavaScript in the same file where React is running. Like, React is going to control this. These two won't be happening in the same file at any point in time in the world of React. Okay, the only time you reference it is down here to grab it, okay? But I don't know. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure why it's not showing me the other message, right? Because I'm targeting a separate container. I do have two divs here, container 1 and container 2. It's really not showing it, so I don't know what's happening. I have to investigate as to why. But this isn't something that we'd be doing anyway. Okay?
Okay. Yeah, so we're just illustrating we can do the same thing.
Yeah, that's the whole point of this exercise, which is, so I would comment that out because we're not going to be using this and this simultaneously. They won't be used together in the same application. All right. So let's do this. Let's take a break. It's 11:13. Let's come back at 11:23, and then we'll jump back into the rest of React. Take a break.
Hey, Joe, can you hang back for a second?
Sure, yeah.
Thank you.
I'll stay on the line for anybody who needs help. All right.
I don't know. I'm way behind, so it'd be nice to catch up.
All right. So tell me what's going on, and let's see if we can.
Well, for the longest, I was getting a syntax error, which I had to copy and paste from other people to even get it to work. And now I'm getting.
Share your screen then. I'm going to stop sharing. Share your screen. Let's. All right.
That's getting at that web address.
All right. So you got to go to Developer Tools because I can't investigate anything unless we're in Developer Tools.
On which one though? The Hello World or this one?
The only one that we're working. Yeah. No, the server one. We don't care about the one that's the local file. We care only about this one. And so this tells me that you don't have the web server started. That's what that tells me.
Like I said, Joe, I'm way behind.
All right, so start up, go to your terminal. Yeah, so the web server is not started. Do an ls. I just want to make sure you are where you're supposed to be. All right, so again, did you install the HTTP server?
No, I didn't even. I did the, and this one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so then run HTTP dash. No, don't type run. Just do HTTP dash server. That's it. Dash server. Hit enter. If the server's, installed, there you go. Go back to the page, refresh. There you go.
I'm getting this now.
No, you should get that.
Okay.
Everyone's going to get that. The fave icon is just an icon that the browser's looking to load as the little icon in the tab up top. And we don't really have a fave icon. So it's just telling us that's not a bad message. That's just like, hey, you don't have a fave icon. No worries. Your app works.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Well, so you're all set up. Like you
think.
weren't far behind.
Well, when I got to you, I wasn't far behind. Asked me 2 minutes ago, I was.
Okay. All right. Anybody else having problems?
I think that fixed my problem. Thanks.
That picture? Okay, cool. Awesome.
Actually, Joe, are you still there?
Yeah.
I thought I fixed it, but I didn't.
Okay. So
Or I fixed one thing and didn't get.
go ahead.
So I just get I'm just getting messages. I'm not getting.
Okay. So go back. What's happening is you didn't put the message in curly braces. So go back into the app. Oh, you do have it as curly braces. So go back, and this is saved, right? This file is saved. Go back to the page and do a hard refresh by holding the shift key down and then refresh.
There we go. Cool. Sweet.
Sweet. All right, Jack. You got it. Okay, so we're back. I just slacked out the second portion of this morning's lecture. It's a 3-part lecture. And so now we're moving into the world of components, which is really the heart, I would say, of React, or the area of React where you're going to be working the most. So understanding components is important, how they work and whatnot. So our objectives for this are just to learn to think in React. This is, I'm going to say that this concept of learning to think in React is similar to designing any web page, and we'll get into that in more detail. But learn to think in React. We'll build out some components, and then we'll put our components inside of other components. So nesting component hierarchy, okay? So when we think in React, so I did mention that thinking in React would be similar to perhaps if you were asked to design a web page, and they were like, all right, I'll design this. How would you design it? Where would you put the elements on the page? What would the nav be? Where would it be positioned? What elements would it be contained, right? You'd mock it up before and then get client approval before you build it, right? You just wouldn't build something and then the client's like, oh man, that's not the navigation I wanted. That's not the design I wanted. You would design it first. So when you're thinking in React, you start with what it's going to look like already, this design, and then you break that design down into components. Okay, that's the important thing here. The components are the things that make up what you see on the page. Okay, and the React docs are a real key resource for this. This actual image here is really coming from the React documentation. There's a lot of concepts in the React docs. There's advanced concepts, basic concepts. There's a lot of material, but once again, really good stuff. But what they start with is this particular little table. And we've seen something like this. You've gone to any website, Amazon or anything else where you're shopping, there is going to be on the page a place to filter your search, whether that is in this instance, they're showing sporting goods and electronics. Whatever it is, if it was just sporting goods, then maybe you would filter it based on football or baseball or outdoor sports or indoor sports, whatever it is. But there's always going to be a somehow filterable thing there. And then the goods themselves. And the goods will have a name of a good and a price of a good, a category for the particular good that you're looking for. What category does it fall into? And then the actual good itself, right? And then maybe some other indication about the element itself, like this basketball being red. I don't know. What does that mean? Is it out of stock? Is it on sale? I don't know from this particular image, but we'd have to kind of come to some sort of conclusion that it's red for a reason and red means something, right? So if we were to take this, we could break this down into components. And so here, the orange represents a parent component. See this orange here? How it encompasses everything? That becomes a component. And in essence, maybe that component is the section that contains the search and the product table. What I want you to start thinking is not only does that orange box, the filterable product table, represent some sort of functionality in React, it also represents the HTML structure of that thing, okay? So if I was building this out, maybe this orange would be an article or a section or a mean or whatever, okay? In this instance, it's going to be a React components, and components render UI, okay? I'm just going to put that in here, that components render UI, okay? Just trying to make it as boom, that's what they do. So the reason why you look at this, you would then ask yourself, oh, what are the components? Because components render UI, so that must mean everything here is coming from a component. So we have this filterable product table, which is this. Then we have the search bar, which is blue. Then we have this product table, which is green. And then we have a product category row, which is turquoise. And then the actual product row here, which is red. And we would kind of design it like this, because there is an architecture to this. I'm going to see if I can just annotate this real quickly here. Annotate, right? Draw. So if we were doing this, we would have something like the filterable, I'm just going to kind of abbreviate here, product table, okay? Table, right? And this would be, I'm not going to do it in the colors that are there. This is going to take me forever to change the colors, but the filterable product table is the parent. And then the parent clearly has two things that it is rendering. It is rendering this search bar, right? And it's also rendering the product table, okay? Table. It's rendering this component, and it's rendering that component, okay? And then the product table is rendering two things also. It's rendering this product category row and a product row. What you're going to see a lot when it comes to creating your React hierarchy is that kind of structure, that kind of diagram that describes the relationship between these elements. Okay, because what we're going to learn later is that these two elements right here cannot talk directly to each other. These two elements cannot talk directly to each other. Okay, there is no communication between child elements, that everything must go to the parent, and then the parent must convey new information down. Okay, there is a relationship here, and that React is unidirectional in its data flow. Okay, unidirectional meaning that all the data flows up and then all the data flows down. Okay, so what you'll see is this kind of structure used several times over. So I'm going to save it, but I will also capture that. Okay. Do it one more time because it didn't stick. There we go. Now, the reason why I kind of emphasize these types of tables, right? I mean, this looks pretty, clear it, clear all the drawings. Okay, stop the annotation. Is when it comes to drawing these things, it's going to help you understand it. So now that we have something like this, so say we wanted to build something like a React tic-tac-toe game, which is a pretty standard app to build when you're kind of working with React. And you have this. Where are our components? Just looking at it right now, you could probably see clear indications where things represent HTML elements themselves, right? These containerized things. I would, just looking at this, we're going to take a look in just a second, but I would probably say that this looks like a component and this looks like a component. They're just rendering the same UI, just different values. This looks like it could be a component here, and then these little things look like they could be components too, right? The boxes, right? And then when we get down to it, here is what it actually looks like, okay? So we have an application here, which is the blue, and then we have a header that has the tic-tac-toe and an H1 inside. Then we have a sibling to the header, which is the player's scores, right? H1 and an H3, and then the board right here, that has little squares in it. And each square will then have something inside of it. And so this becomes our structure, okay? So when you look to design this, if this would have been your mock-up, if we said build a tic-tac-toe game, your first thing that you should do now when it comes to React is draw it out. Draw out the thing. Draw out what it should look like. Then you can start building out these components. And a great start with React is to build out the HTML and then work in your logic. Okay, I would suppose it's no different than like your project one, right? Build out the HTML, something that you could have probably done easier, and then work out the logic. Hey, here's the button. I didn't put the logic there for the button, but I just created it. When I get everything else done nicely, then I'll work on the logic. If they click the button, then do the thing, right? So here you would work out that structure for it. I just want to show you an example of a nicely drawn out, right? Can everyone see this? Okay, this was drawn out. I'll even share the pictures. I just uploaded it this morning. One of my previous students would come into class with, she had a tablet, and she was an artist. She drew, and she drew out something that she was building. She was building she would build out these little things every week. I survived, and she would build it in HTML and CSS and then add something to it. This particular one, she wanted to have something where you could click on. And she built this out. And I thought it was really, really cool. And it shows the hierarchy, and she just put everything in colors, kind of like what we were, I was trying to do it with the pen, but the diagrams really did have them in color. And it broke down what was being passed up and what was being passed down, things like props, where is state. This is stuff that we're going to get into. Okay, now I'm just going to take a snapshot of it. I'll put it into put it in here also. Let's see. All right. I feel like every time something's wrong with my Mac Imager too, because every time I do take one picture, I have to like do it twice, or it just doesn't take. Let me do that. That should do it. Okay. And so she really captured, she did it with a few others. I have another one in here where she also built another app and she broke it down. We're not going to go into this detail. I'm only showing you how breaking things down and structuring them is important. Okay, and it will come in handy later on when you are working through this structure. Okay, so let's build out this little tic-tac-toe game. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to terminate the server here. I don't need the Hello World app running. We're going to create another app, so there's no reason to have Hello World running simultaneously. Unless you wanted to work on things, you could work on them on the side. So here, I'm going to go up one directory. So I'm in the instructor intro to React. I'm going to create another directory, React, tac, toe. Okay. I'm going to change into the React, right? So I have two things in here. I'm going to change into the React tac-toe. I'm going to touch an index HTML and an app.js, and we should have it. And then I'm just going to open up Atom. So I have it right here. Okay, here we go. The React tac-toe. Here we go. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take the same content. So you can either copy and paste it from the other app that you had. Okay. Here's not the one that I wanted. This is the one. I'm just going to copy and paste it here. It's not something I read. This is identical to what we did earlier. So I'll just paste that out. If you want to copy and paste this, if you want to copy and paste what you had. You won't be doing this on a regular basis. Once we get to other tools like Create React App, you won't be concerned with like loading these files in this way. Create React App will do it. So there's no reason to like have mastery over this. It's not something we're going to be doing on a regular basis. This is just kind of the intro to React. Okay, and the only thing I want to do in the app is to do React DOM dot render, and then the two questions, right? What do you want to render? React Tacto. And where do you want to render it? Document dot query selector contain. Okay. So remember, this represents the what to render, and this represents the where to render it. Okay? They're both saved. And then we'll just start up the server, make sure it works, and then everyone else can just test it out and make sure that they're on port. Here, HTTP server, boom, listening on port 8080. Here we go. I stopped my old server. So there we go. I had to hold the shift key for the hard refresh. So I'm going to wait. This is all we did. No app.js. This one more time. There we go. Did that. Make sure it works. The only thing that you should see that's an error is the favicon. But that's nothing to be concerned about. Favicon is nothing we should worry ourselves with. It even kind of gives us some default type favicon, whatever that little thing is. Cool. 7. Definitely type out the React DOM render. Once again, just to kind of get yourself working with this. It is relatively new. We had done this, a bunch of times by now. I would say, hey, just copy and paste it. But in all honesty, you'll type it one time per application. I'll be making a few adjustments here because in the end, when it comes to answering the what do you want to render, it's going to be mostly what component do you want to render. So if I was to say what to render, I would kind of rephrase this as what component or what parent component do you want to render, okay? We're not going to be rendering just like in each one. We're going to be rendering the parent application, okay? And the parent application is really the parent component. Where we want to render it, that's still always going to be the same question, and it's always this, you tell it where you want. Do you want to render it on the body? Do you want to render it in a container? Do you want to render it in a main, a section? Just like Angular, you could have multiple Angular apps on the same page. React can have multiple React applications on the same page, all responsible for sub-portions of the page. It doesn't have to render the whole thing or be responsible. You could have multiple subsections, okay? You get your server up to date. That's it. Looks pretty good so far. We got 15, 16. All right. So we're going to create our first component. Now, there's React. Here's the thing with React, and that's why it's hard to keep up sometimes. React is so kind of bleeding edge that what you learned a year ago in React is starting to become deprecated today, and you have to know the latest thing. It's really tough sometimes with React just to stay updated. So, they describe here there's a few ways to write React components, and some are just outdated. And there's these new bleeding ways to do it. We're going to write our components in one way. There's, once again, several different ways to write them. We're going to write them specifically here as classes, okay? And we're going to keep them all consistent, all right? There are two different types of components, class-based components and functional components, but the ones that we're going to work with today are just class-based components. That's all we're going to be doing, okay? So I'm going to go into our app here, and at the very top of the app, I'm going to create a class. Class app. Now this class app is going to extends the React component. Okay, component. It is going to render. I'll go into what this does. It's going to render something, and then it's going to return something. So I'm going to say return something. Okay. We have to put something in the return, otherwise it's going to error out on us. Okay, you just go see. Did it error out? Yeah, it's already erroring out on me because I don't have anything in the return. It's a blank return. And what did I say components do? Does anybody remember what I pasted earlier? Anyone who want to tell me? Components do what? What do components do? Nobody, huh?
They deal with the UI and rendering the UI HTML elements.
Yes. So components render UI. That's what they render. Here, I'm pasting it again. Components render UI. The fact that this component is not rendering any UI is the reason. It's like, hey, you're trying to render something and we have this return, but there's nothing here to return. It's blank. So it's kind of screaming at us. So what we want to do is this. We want to take the H1 from our React DOM render, put it inside our component, and replace it with the name of the component itself. In this construct, though, pay close attention. This looks like a self-closing element, almost like an image tag or a break tag, right? Something like that, something that's self-closing. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to take out, I'm not going to take the comma with me. The comma is going to stay here. But I'm going to cut that out. I'm going to replace it with app space / greater than. I'm going to take that content and I'm going to paste it in here. Okay? So I did mention earlier, what parent component do you want to render? Okay? In this case, it's the app component. Okay? Now, what I want to point out here is also just some notes about components, is that components must start with an uppercase letter. Okay? That is a convention of React. The app here starts with an uppercase letter. Okay? If it doesn't error out here in our little simulation, it will error out later if this is not uppercase. Okay? They also must, class components must extend, and I'm going to put here inherit the React component. Okay, so what this tells us is there's a parent or this higher level class called React component. And that our class is just inheriting from that. So there's functionality happening inside of this that we need for our class-based component. That's really important. You're always going to have to extend the class-based components. Otherwise, it won't work. Okay? Components. So class-based. I'm going to say class-based components must. I'm just going to say this. Okay? Because I'm going to add some additional things. They extend or inherit. They must include a render method that returns UI. This is a render method. Okay, this is a render method. Okay, and a render method, a method in JavaScript is a function attached to a class. That's what this is. Okay, and all it is it's rendering something. And so it's returning back something and it's returning back that. Okay, it's all saved because I added that save tool, everything gets saved. I'm gonna just go back here, do a hard refresh, and let's see. Everything should work accordingly, right? Nothing's broken. This is what we want to see. Okay, so I'm going to go here. This is what we're shooting for. Okay, make sure. I'm just going to do it again. Make sure this is set up. There you go. Make sure that's working. And so far, it seems like, in all honesty, just a lot more code to write to get something on the page. At the beginning, yes. Is there more code to write to get something on the page? Yes. But we're doing so with the intent that the additional code is going to give us some structure, right? And now that you come to this app, the thing that you would be able to explain to somebody is if I said if there were a bunch of components and we're going to add more components, and I was like, hey, what's the main component here that's being rendered? You would go down to React DOM render. That would be the indication as to what the parent component is, right? You automatically know that, okay? So at least you're able to answer that question, and then you'll see app. Because as we add some additional components, we might change the order of where these things are, okay? Do I create the other components above this? Do I create it below it? All depends, in all honesty, on the approach that you took for React. Okay, and then the only other thing I wanted to mention was this self-closing tag. This is just, they are these custom ways, or they're components, so they're like, I don't know, in the world of Angular, they were something called, I think they were like directives, which were custom HTML elements that you created. You could create the element and give it the naming convention that you wanted, and then it could then be executed and execute all of the Angular code in React. Very similar. This is a component. Because of it, it is kind of like an HTML thing, and so we have to create it and call it like an HTML element. That's kind of what's happening here. All right? So we have it. Now, we want to add additional components. Okay, as part of our design, we saw that there was a header, there were some, player 1 and player 2, and then the board, and then the boxes. So we need to create some of that structure. So here, above the class-based components, we could add this. So I'm going to say class header. I'm just going to create some space here. Class header. I'm going to give it an uppercase H, because that's the naming convention. Extends React component. Okay, curly braces. It must render something, right? It must contain the render method, and the render method must return something. What is it going to return? Well, it's going to return this HTML that exists inside of our app, but I'm going to cut it out of our app. I am going to put it into our header, and then inside of the app, I'm going to replace that H1 with a reference to the header. Okay? I'm just going to save that. I'm just going to make sure it works first, right? Everything looks good. I'm doing a hard refresh by holding the shift key. Everything looks good. You can even, change the name, React Tic-Tac-Toe, header, anything just to kind of convey that it is truly changing and you're just not seeing the results of a previous thing. Okay? So that's what we're looking to do. Make sure that works.
Joe, is it always required to do a hard refresh in order to see changes for
No.
type stuff?
In this particular instance, yes, but you won't have to do this once we get to create React app.
Okay.
Okay, it is a bit tedious right now because we are loading these things from the index. And so index is like, I don't know you changed the file, so I got to kind of like have Babel retranspile everything back. Okay, that's what it needs to do, right? It needs to transpile everything. So it needs to look inside of your app, examine the contents, and be like, oh, I don't know if things changed or not. I just know that you're telling me to retranspile it, whatever is in there. If this was normal JavaScript and we made the changes and we saved the changes to app.js, app.js would have probably just updated on a page refresh. Just like this one tiny little annoyance that we just have to deal with doing it this way. And so what you're seeing here is an instance of returning a component, right? So app is the parent component. App must take control of the whole application, and in doing so, it is responsible for, I'm just going to go back up to the picture, it's responsible for rendering all of these things, okay? All of those individual things must be rendered with inside app. They can be created outside of app, but they must be rendered within the app component because it is the thing that is being called here. And because it's being called there, it is the all-knowing thing for our application. Okay, and what you're seeing here is an example of nested components. Example of nesting components, right? Header is a component that is now being returned from app, which in itself is a component, okay? I'm gonna go back down here. So we see that, right? How are we doing? 12, 13, 14. It's good, numbers are going up. This is awesome. Okay. So far, it's going to look pretty intuitive. After a certain time, it's going to be like, hey, this doesn't look so crazy. Wow, it's just a different structure and context of creating the things, but they don't look so different once you start to see the patterns that are being created. Okay. So we have here our app, and we have the header, right? I want to create those two little player boxes for player 1 and player 2. Now, the one thing about those two things is that they are identical except for one references player X and one references player Y. That's the only difference between. So I'm going to create a component that in the end can be used 2 times. And if we give it specific data, it can take that data and render the first one saying player X, and it can render another one saying player Y, but it's the same component, okay? It's reusable. That's one of the advantages of React, is that it allows you to create reusable components. A structure on the page that contains the appropriate HTML elements, and all you have to give it is the new data for those things, right? Think like a Facebook post or an Instagram post or a Pinterest post. They're all structurally the same, they just contain different data. So here, we're going to create another component called player. This is going to extends React component. Okay, same thing. It needs to render some UI, and in the render method, we need to return some UI. And this UI, we're going to structure as a div. I'm just going to close the div. And then inside of the div, we will say, hey, there's going to be an H2 that says player, right? And we'll close the H2. We will create an H3 that counts how many times they won, wins, and we'll close the H3. Okay. One thing I want to mention here, I'm going to put a note up here as it pertains to JSX, right? Because this is JSX. Even though we don't see any JavaScript being rendered here, this is JSX. And JSX has these following things, that it can only return one parent element, okay? But that element can contain, and I'm just going to say an infinite number of elements, okay? In this return, we can only have one parent, and that parent here is represented by div. Inside of div, we could have literally the whole Instagram page or Facebook page rendered within this. But everything needs to be contained in one parent, and it can render as many of these child elements as possible. And I'll demo what it would look like if it errored out. I'm going to save this. I'm going to do it. I just want to make sure that it looks all good, right? Oh, we haven't rendered it yet. Okay, so let me render this. I'm going to go into our app here, and inside of the app, just do player, add the component that we want to render, hard refresh. Oh, what happens? Header player. Oh, this is the issue, right? Okay, so do you see here how I'm trying to render two elements that are not inside a parent element? Take a look at this error message. Adjacent JSX elements must be wrapped in a closing tag. Okay? See that? That's the error. Okay? If you get that error, which you should, and which you will, there's going to be times you're just going to like forget to do it. I'm just going to put the error in our Slack channel. The issue here is that these two are not wrapped in a parent element, and so we need to put them inside of a parent. Once again, you could give the parent whatever structure you want. You could give it a div with a class of container. It could be a wrapper. It could be a section, an article. It doesn't matter what it is, but it has to be inside of a parent element. So I'm just going to go up here, refresh it. My error message went away, and now it works. Okay? So this is how app needs to be rendered. Okay? Make sure. Let's see, is my imager working? No. Oh, it's always one behind this thing. Okay. So make sure that that's working and everything else is working. Okay? Give me a thumbs up or whatever icon you want to use. Let me know that it's working. In essence, these components could act as though they are partial-like, right? Like the header is acting like a partial in the fact that I can just render it, right? If I needed this header rendered in other portions of the app, we can just render it as many times as we want. in here, since it's our parent app, we're really just rendering the header one time, right? That's all we really need to do. Okay. If it works once with player, it will work a second time with player. So if you get it working with one player, add another player or render a second player component and see what that looks like on the screen now. Okay? So what happened here is our component became reusable. It's a standard set of HTML that we can call at any point in time we want, and that HTML will be this consistent across the board. It's conceptually like creating functions, right? Functions should take in standard inputs and return standard output. Okay? Before React, before Angular, people were probably writing some code with, a function that would return some DOM element based on JavaScript. Okay? Here, we're doing it using this context. Okay? All right, looks good. Looks good. All right. So now we have these two components. So we know we have a player X and a player O, right? We want to be able to customize the component. I have this reusable thing, this reusable player component. At this point in time, its reusability up to how we've constructed it is just to output the same text. It really doesn't say, well, which is the player. It just says player and then wins, right? We want to give that component the ability to output which player is which, okay? And so we're going to start using this concept called props. Props is a way for us to pass data to a component, okay? And it's a special term in React. I did mention the two things along with components are going to be props and state. You're being introduced to props right now. So we're going to make a custom prop, which is going to be called which player, and then pass it the appropriate player's name. Okay. So here inside of our app, because that's where it's happening, inside of player, I'm going to create something called which player, and that's going to be equal to X. And the next one is going to be called which player, and that's going to be O. And I'm giving them both the same name. I'm passing them the same thing. Okay? So think of, if you had to think of it as like a, a function, it's a function player, and I'm passing in an argument of X. And inside of the function, we would reference that parameter X as, which player, or which player could be the, here, let's take a look. If this was a component, right? If this was a function, it might be referenced like this, like, hey, player, hey, if this was a function, I would say, hey, which player, right? Player, my thing's a little slow, okay? And that would be our function. And we'd call the function later on as, player, and I'd pass it a string of X, right? And so by passing this string of X, we'd be passing it as this into the function itself, right? So this is us defining the function or creating the function, okay? That's our function keyword. That's our function name. And we'd be passing in, we'd create a parameter called wherePlayer. And then once we call the function here, we pass it in a string of text. Once that string of text gets passed into the function, wherePlayer, which player is what's referenced in here. In here, which player will be equal to X. Okay? That's what's happening here. Now, the fact that we've passed it in means we have to do something with it, right? Player here doesn't really have any context to using which player, right? It's just like, all right, you're passing me in something. That's great. But how do I use the thing that you passed in? Here in player, we can do this. We can reference it as this dot props dot which player. Okay? Now there's no wins. We're just going to reference this. Now, in this instance, I'm just going to make sure this works, and then I'll come back and we'll add some notes here. Player X and player O, right? We see that that has changed. I'm going to go back in here, just maybe do a little bit more annotation. It's a new topic. I'm just going to try to annotate as much as I can. Here. All right. So the concept of this, right? This is going to point to the context of the player component. Okay. What was that in Ruby? How did you reference this? What was the keyword in Ruby? Self, right? Self was the keyword, and this has always been something that you understood from the world of React, right? So there's a context. This represents the context of the thing that you're in. Now this thing of props right here, well, this is just kind of this magic thing that's just being passed under the hood, all right? This is React. React has a way of doing things, just like in Rails. You know, if we called it people controller, it knew where to go for things, right? It knew to look for a file called people_controller. Like, it knew that. We didn't have to, like, tell it specifically. If we called the controller people controller, both uppercase first letters, then it knew where to look for that, right? If we said the people model, it knew where to look for that. Like, it was really intuitive. This props is being passed down through React. And in essence, and we'll get into this, but props itself is really an object, okay? And this object is going to contain key value pairs. And in this instance, you know, it's which, I'm just going to stop at player, and it'll be X for the first time that the component was run, and it will be O for the next time the component's run. But props is going to be an object, just like in Express, params was an object, right? In Rails, what was the object in Rails? It was params as well, right? That was an object, right? Objects are an efficient way of storing key value pairs that are related to one another. So anything that gets passed into this props, right? Anything else that gets passed into it will be stored as some sort of key value pair, whatever it is. This is not down here the only thing that I can pass in to when we're looking at the app itself. I'm just going to stop the annotations. I can pass in as many props as I want here, as many things as I want, and props itself will contain those things passed in as key value pairs. Okay? So let me clear the annotations. Okay. And we could see that by, if we did this, let's just, you know, take a quick look. If I was to just, this should work here, console log, this is props from player, okay? And I'm gonna say this dot props. I just want to see what that would look like. And I go here, and look, this is props from player. And look how many times it was output. You see, it was output twice because we called it twice. This, oh, so annoying, man. I gotta fix my thing. So it is an object, and you can pass as many things as you want into this object. And if you console log it, you will see that props is just an object, and it contains the key and the value that you passed in. Whatever this is passed will be converted in props. React takes it and says, oh, this was the name and this is the value. Well, that's the key, and this is going to be the value for it. Okay? I think we're almost to the end here, but it's 12:14. I think let's take let's take our break, because there is going to be a little lab here too, a little tiny exercise before we continue. If anyone's having an issue, I'll stick around. I'll help you out. You can Slack me. I'll reach out. But let's take a break. It's 12:14. Let's come back at 12:24. 12:24. Okay. Take a break. Come back at 12:24. Once again, you have any questions, I'll be here. I'm just going to fill up my glass real quickly. But Slack me.
Joe, can you show your atom again?
Sure.
Please. Thank you. I want to see the console log.
Oh, you want to see the console log here?
No. Where you wrote it in the player class.
Oh, you want to see where I put the console log? Right here.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Sure. I'm back if anybody needed any help. Okay. I'll be here. Just reach out. Just going to jump off video and mute myself.
$12.24. Okay. I need water. Well, I should finish eating this.
All right. Everyone back. Back. All right. So let's add another component. Okay. So the one thing that is at this point in time is missing is the board, right? We have the header, we have the player X, player O. Now in the design, player X is here, player O is there. That's just CSS. We still need CSS. This just creates the elements. We still need to add styling, and that'll be the next lecture. Here I'm going to go ahead and create a class of board that, once again, extends React.components. Okay, just going to create a little space between these components. We are going to render something. That something needs to return something. We need to have a parent element, at least one element that can contain an infinite amount of child elements. In this instance, we're just referencing the board, right? So what we want to create, right? Create that one component, and then we have to add it to the board right here, right? Board. I'm sorry, we have to add it to the app. Okay, so that okay, and then we're just going to add it once again to the board right here. This is in our app. Let's get it there. Now, all it's going to do is render the board, right? That's all it's doing. It's just rendering the board. So here's a small little kind of you do. Okay. So on your own, we're going to give it, this is going to be an on your own kind of thing. What you're going to wind up doing is, let me just give it some more time. I want to make sure everyone's just kind of up to speed on this, right? Which is nothing new, right? I'm just going to collapse the header, collapse player, so you can see the structure here. All we did was create this board, returns some text. I collapse that. You can go down to the app, which is the main player here, right? This renders all of the other components, okay? That's all it does. Our complete set of code is here. And what you're going to wind up doing, okay, is you're going to make a component called square. It's the one thing that's kind of not present in our board are squares, right? So I see the potential to have at least 9 squares added, all being created via a standard square component. So in essence, what you would be doing here is make one or more components called square, right? Make one more component, I'm not one or more, one more component called square. Make up a div, made up of a div, and inside the div put an H4 element, and inside of the H4 element put some text like the word square. Once again, the squares at this point in time, if they're divs, don't have any width or heights, so you really wouldn't see anything. So the H4 is just to give it some context, right? That the thing is on the page and you visually see it, right? So divs have an empty width of 0, so make sure to add that text. Otherwise, you won't see it. And then render 9 squares inside of the board, okay? In the next lecture, which is pretty small, we'll learn how to incorporate the CSS, but for now, your job is to create a square component that renders an H4 with some text, and inside of the board components, you are going to render 9 of those thing. So if I was to just put some notes here, I would say create a square. Here, let me just do it in lowercase here. Create a square component, right? Component that renders in H4 with some text, okay? And in here, what we'd want to do is render the square component 9 times. Okay? That's what you're going to do. So I'm just going to put here a created when you're done, just give me a thumbs up. Let me know you're done. It's probably going to take sooner than, 10 minutes. Cool. I'm sure some of you are already thinking like, hey, how would I render 9 of them, but without having to type them out like player, right? For now, you are just going to write them out. But the intent is, if I had to loop over something several times, like the number of elements in an array, I could produce the number of squares. So if I knew I had to loop 9 times, I could then produce or return these squares 9 times. A for loop isn't going to work though. Okay, we'll get to that in the afternoon, how to solve that. But right now, we'd have to do it 9 times, 9 individual times. Okay, looks pretty good. 14. Okay. I'll go ahead and also create it. There are a few people left that haven't clicked on it, but I'll go ahead and create it. So if you did get stuck, you can just kind of watch here. So school class as square extends back dot component. Okay, it needs to render something, right? Every class-based component has a render method. The render method needs to return something. What did it say to put inside an H4? So we just return back in H4. What do we say to put inside? Put somewhere like square. All right. Square. H4. Easy enough, right? Spell square correctly. And then inside the board, we would just have to put these squares. So I don't really need the text the board now. It's kind of redundant to have that here. And we could just say square. And if I was to just paste that 9 times, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 times. Oop. it should show us the square. Okay? Not too hard. Once again, we're following a standard structure here. Creating it, using a class, giving it the name. Everything here has been identical except the name has to be uppercase. I'll show you what if I did not create it as an uppercase. Let's see what would happen. Oh, it still works here. No, here we go. It's not going to work because I have to hold the shift key down. Oh man, snap square is not defined. So I'm going to put it in uppercase. Now, obviously, square here was all, where's the board? Where's the board? Here. Square here is all uppercase. So what if I did something like, something easier, so I don't have to change everyone. What if I did board as lowercase and I did board as lowercase, just to say. I never do this. It's like one of the things you never do in React. You write it the right way. And didn't look like anything looks broken here. I'm just trying to see if it output the container. Yeah, it outputted as board, right? Which it's not referencing this thing, right? It's not referencing this div with squares. It's outputting something called board as its own element, which is a little weird, which is not what we want. So we can already say that something here is wrong. I'm going to go back here, do board in uppercase. You will see later on in other tools that that would error out, that it won't accept that. Okay? Okay. That's good. Everyone good? I've got 17. I assume everyone's on point right now. Awesome. So let's hit the last lecture, just React and CSS. And get this done and we can jump into a lab. Okay. Boom. Here we go. You're right, I do say boom a lot. So we want to add some styling. Obviously, being a front-end developer and working with React will require that you have both the solid skills for React, JavaScript, ES6, as well as the ability to add styling. The minute you will go to the front end, you have to be able to style as well. Your job is not going to be solely, I'm just going to build out the functionality, but my thing won't need any styling. That's not going to work. So we need to add styling. We want to kind of make it look like that. Now, we could touch the file. I'm already up here in React in my file. So I'm just going to say new file and say main.css. Okay? Just creating a main CSS file. Here it is. Okay? I'm going to go into my index file and create a reference to it, right? So I have, hey, here are my script tags. I'm just going to add a link tag here. If I do link, hey, it tells me where's the reference to it, main.css. We're in the same folder, so it's easy enough to reference it. I don't need to go up and down directories since I'm in it. The style sheet. Cool. And then we just have some default CSS. We're not going to type this out from scratch. I'll paste that out, and we can just put that into our main CSS file. Okay? And if we do that, and we do a hard refresh, oh, we should have some styling here. Didn't add all the styling, but it gave us, you know, nice background color. That's pretty much it. So created and added CSS. Okay, so just let me know when you've gotten that. All that was creating a main CSS file, linking that in HTML, and then copying and pasting some CSS. Okay? once we do that, we can start targeting. Now, these are general broad scopes, like there's always a body, right? There's always HTML. So these are kind of easier to target, okay? And if you don't do this as of yet, where you use that root element, you should start using it. Just get used to using that. It's a newer way of doing it, and just a technique you should incorporate, and it'll just make your designs easier to manage, okay? And so adding CSS now, there is just one thing that we have to be aware of. I mean, we know about classes and how to add classes to something. I'm going to go into the player class right here, okay? So player class extends React components. And we have the, you know, the div here. Here's player 2, right? And here's the H3. So for the div, I'm going to give it a class name. So this is the limitations, or I don't know, the use cases, the usage of using classes is we have to call it class name because class is a reserved word in Java, in React. So we can't say class is equal to, we have to say class name, okay? Really it. And then we're just gonna reference what it is that we wanna reference. Hey, this dot props dot which player. Okay, so really what we're saying here is whatever the player is, I want a CSS class that will be assigned to that particular person. And then we can target in CSS. We can do like X and O and like target those elements and give them CSS. If we were to just like refresh and just take a look here, we would see that, look, that this has a class of X and this has a class of O. I'd probably do something more like player X and player O instead of giving them class of X and O, but once again, easy enough, okay? Player X, player O. Really the only small other thing, this, right? This is one thing we need to do here. Make sure you get that in, and that was put into player. It's just the board. Really, the board needs a class name as well. Class name is equal to board. And here, we're just giving it a string of text. It doesn't always have to be a variable that needs to be enumerated. It can be a string of text, and you know, for a large portion of your code, it's going to be just a string of text, okay? It's all it's going to be. Let's make sure. It's not going to really change anything, but once again, you know, you added it, just confirm that it's there. Here's class board, class O, class X, right? Obviously for our square though, you know, we just have the text in there. So there's no, we're not adding any classes here, right? I just see square. In the end, we will remove square. We don't want it to say square. Okay. There's quite a bit of CSS here. So we're not going to be typing this all out. I'm just going to kind of copy paste this to get it working. You know, CSS is not focus of the lesson, but you'll see things like, hey, here's some other stuff if it wasn't already covered. There's things like grid is being used here. Flexbox is always like our default to thing that we go to all the time. And so I'm just going to go, I'm going to paste it in here. I will paste it here. Okay. And if we go to it, and I do a hard reset, boom. So we can remove square. We probably want to add some styling to square to maybe square is missing. One thing is probably missing is the, box around it. But at least we see the placeholders. We know that it would take text. It is eventually going to take X or O's, right? User clicks on a square. Depending on the user, that will turn into an X or an O. So we can at least confirm that our element accepts text. The text displays on the screen. Okay. Good. Okay. Just make sure it's applied. Looks good. You didn't get any error messages. If you did, let me know. We can work through those errors. There's also other ways. Once again, React is always evolving, and there's other ways to incorporate React, CSS into your React. You have time later, there's 4 ways to style a React component. Okay, so you can always play around with this. There's style sheet, importing the style sheet directly into the actual file. This isn't going to work now because we're not using React. You can already tell like these two aren't going to work because this is more Node-esque, right? Inline styling, React can contain these style elements here that you can then reference later on. So I create a whole style element that I can then reference later on. Okay, so you can add the styles in line if you want. There's modules that you can install, CSS modules as well. What's the last one? Let me see, styled components. Yeah, this is kind of a big deal. A lot of people opt to do styled components. Once again, we're just starting off basic. In the end, when you start working through your projects, you want to kind of take it to the next level. What I would do is obviously read which one of those is the better approach, which one is the best adopted one. Styled components is usually the one I read about when I'm talking about CSS and adding CSS to React. You can go either way. Once again, depending on who's using it, what their skill level is of it, their needs. Awesome. So, we do it. About React. Hey. So let me know how you're feeling about React so far. We haven't really gone too fast with it. And I can clearly understand, wrapping your head around it. There's a lot of new things. Outside of that, it may seem a bit more intuitive to some. So, hey, this is great. Like, I'm getting it. And then you start seeing things like, man, what's this whole component thing and nesting things? Like, this is kind of crazy. This is all brand new. Again, it's brand new stuff. This, like everything else, is just going to get easier. You just have to apply it. Okay? And applying it is what you're going to do now, because we're going to jump into our lab. And let me get to the lab here. Student lab, here's the morning lab. Lab time. All right. Lab. Let me do this. Morning lab. Okay, React. Edit elements. This URL again. All right. Boom. All right. Let me set up breakout rooms. And then create the breakout rooms. And make sure we got everybody. So it looks like we got some 2s and 3s. So I'm going to recreate these. 2s and 3s, recreate the Romans. All right. One more 2s and 3s. All right, cool. Looks good. Looks like everyone's got it. All right. I'm going to Slack it out. It's going to be the lab. I'll go through the lab and then I'll shoot you off into your own, into the groups. All right. So you're going to be building some static components. All right. So backstory, you know, the end of the year is coming. You've been asked to show off your portfolio and projects to your friends and families. But you want to give them insights into it. So you want to use some sort of analytical tool, a dashboard, right? A D3 dashboard, because I love D3. So you decide to kind of make your own little dashboard. And so this is how you would outline the dashboard. This is how it would look. And so clearly there are segments here or HTML sections, right? This reviews section, an average rating section, sentiments and analysis, something here that looks like a navigation, and then website visitors. You're building out just the structure. We're not asking to build out any sort of interactive dashboard. So try to like wireframe it using React, right? Because you already have it. So you could always kind of break these things out into what they need to be. And then once you get started with it, you know, you're going to get started, walk you through how to get it all started, stuff that we did, the boilerplate here, resetting, you know, or adding text to Babel, rendering the comments board, starting up the web server. And then ultimately, you know, it came from this idea, this particular dashboard. Once again, you are not creating that dashboard. If you can add the CSS to maybe position those elements just so that they align like that as a layout, but in no way do you need to like get any crazy with that. That would be insane. Once again, you're just looking to kind of add the elements, and if you can add the CSS, great. That would be a nice benefit. If not, don't worry about it. Cool. So I'm going to shoot you out into the breakout rooms, and we'll take it to about 1:30. Bring everybody back, and then we'll break out for lunch. And you can reach out to me. I'll be here if you have any issues. Opening all breakout rooms.
Hey, Joe, can I hang back? I need your help.
Sure.
I'm hanging back too.
Okay, sounds good. All right, who wants to share their screen there and walk me through what's going on?
I'll share, because I think me and Iris are having the same issue, actually.
Okay,
Mhm.
Show me what's happening.
That's not the way the CSS is supposed to look.
But, oh, yours just looks, yeah, I mean, maybe because it's too big of a screen. What if you move it in a little bit? I have to take a look and see.
It's like it doesn't have the lines. The things are not centered. Like, I don't know.
Okay, but mine doesn't have lines either.
I thought it was supposed to have lines.
No, I showed you what the result is of mine, adding mine. Mine didn't have any lines to it. Let me share my screen again, and I'll show you what mine looks like right now. Okay?
Fair enough.
Fair enough. Here. Desktop 2. All right. All right. Do you see what mine looks like?
Still looks different from mine, but I guess it's closer. There's no lines, but my stuff, I don't know. I guess it really doesn't matter. It's a CSS issue, right?
Yeah, I would say maybe it's the way you added the things here. Could it have been in your me app.js file? Are they in the sequence? Take a look at your app.js. Do they look like that?
Let me look. Header, which player? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but Joe, I'm looking through the CSS, and it is saying that it's supposed to have a border on the board.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, so something isn't showing up quite right.
Okay.
I did find one typo, but it was somewhere else, and it didn't seem to affect the actual.
I think maybe it's the color. So I'm going to change the border of the board div. So I'm going to go back to, oh, you know why? Here we go. Because we're using H4s instead of divs. So in this CSS, it says board div, and instead it should say an H4. I'm just changing it. And seeing if that, yeah, I changed it. You see here? I mean,
yeah.
Since it really, it really doesn't matter. This is just CSS. It doesn't have to look beautiful. If you applied CSS and you got it, it worked. This is just an oversight in the lecture on the fact that should have been a div instead of an H4. So I would go into the lecture right now and I'll edit and be like, hey, this should have been this. So people aren't creating.
Mine still looks wonky, but it's fine. Like you said, it's just CSS, so it's not.
Yeah, it's just CSS. I wouldn't worry about the CSS. It's creating the components. You obviously got it to a point where the things are rendering, and that's good enough.
Yeah, I guess I was just wondering if maybe I had done that wrong and that's why it wasn't showing up, but I missed that it was named differently.
Yeah, that's just
okay.
an oversight in the thing.
Cool. All right, thank you.
Cool.
Totally separate question, Joe.
Yeah, sure. What's up?
Mind if I work on this and then just not go to a breakout room?
Sure. Okay. That's what you want to do.
I'll turn myself off. I just didn't know if it mattered.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, if you want to work solo today for whatever reason, you can work solo.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Work solo. If you need help, just reach out. Okay?
Thank you.